It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info, and we are coming from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad is at the control, and we are with you here until 5 p.m. And today is a very special day because we are having Her Excellency Ambassador Olivia Toderean, the Ambassador of Romania in Cairo. A very distinguished diplomat who has a degree, a bachelor degree in political science, and a master's degree from the Department of Government Specialization in International Relations, and she has a PhD, magna cum laude, that's very great distinction, from the National School of Political Science and Public Administration at the Faculty of Political Science in Bucharest. Somebody who's a very seasoned diplomat. In spite of her very young age, she's now acting as an ambassador, an extraordinary and plenipotentiary of Romania to the Arab Republic of Egypt. Before that, she served in Romania, and she served in her mission of her embassy in Brussels, which is a very important position, an important embassy, because it's not only representing her country in Belgium, but also representing it in the EU. So a diplomat having all these credentials will be definitely the right person to talk to us about her beautiful country, Romania. Excellency, thank you very much for taking the time and coming to our program here in Studio 3 in Radio Cairo.
Thank you, Dr. Mabrouk, and I'm so happy to be here after we have discussed this for a couple of weeks, like a great plan. And I love that this is a premiere for my mandate in Egypt. It's the first radio show that I attend, and I'm very happy that this is exactly your show. And I hope the listeners will find it interesting for themselves as well.
Definitely, it's very interesting because Romania is a country located at the crossroads of Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe. It borders Ukraine to the north and east, Hungary to the west, Serbia to the southwest, Bulgaria to the south, and Moldova to the east, and the Black Sea to the southeast. Well, this is a very complicated geography, if I may tell you. So how far did this geography affect Romania?
Well, just to open up on this interesting and profound question, is not more complicated than your geography. It must be said, which is something that we now fully realize around the world. Of course, Egyptians knew that they have a complicated and complex geography, but now the whole world knows. It's enough to look on all the headlines on BBC and other channels to see that Egypt's neighborhood is very complicated now. But I'd say our geography, how it impacted Romania. Geography is a very political thing, as you in Egypt know very well, and we know it in Romania as well. So our geography, our political geography, was a double-edged sword, absolutely and categorically, because from a natural geographical point of view, God, if I may say like that, has endowed Romania with a lot of richness. So we have very fertile plains. No wonder we are a big exporter of wheat, for example, to Egypt. So some of your baladi bread, which I like so much, listeners should know is from Romanian wheat. So we have plains, we have mountains, rivers. We are water-wise, for example, we are a rich water country, a very rich country in water, minerals, and so on. So it has, I have everything, sea, seashore, all the landscapes you may find in the some of European countries, you find them all in Romania. So this was a marvelous setting, let's say, at the beginning. Also being on the Black Sea shore, being part of the Black Sea basin. But of course, those riches also meant, like in all the other countries, I think, around the world, and Egypt knows this very well from the pharaonic times, it meant that all powers around and all neighbors envied that or wanted that richness, wanted the power, the influence. So our geography had also the edge of being a difficult geography. We were for 2,000 years between three empires predominantly, and we were split in three small countries. I mean, small royalties, let's say, we call them principalities. So all the Romanians that are now in one country were split in three different parts, and empires around were trying to have at least one part or more of the Romanians within them. So we were fighting the Ottomans, just like you did in a way. Yes. We had the Russians, so Ottomans at the south, Russians at the east, and Austrians, Habsburgic Empire on the northwest. So, and that richness and that geography made us a key country to control in order to have trade, to have merchandise, to be able to feed your army. And our history was full of fighting and trying to oppose big powers. We never went outside our borders. We never tried to, and this is quite an important element of our history, that we never went to conquer anything around. But we had to fight big empires with small capacities.
Yes.
But what I found it very, very interesting, especially for Egyptian public, so to say, those who are interested in following, that maybe it's not so obvious. Along our history, both in Egypt and Romania, our countries were part of the same empire. Mm-hmm. So some of the issues we had to fight with or live with, or some of the issues which had developed us, was the same. We were under Emperor Trajan. We were part of the Roman Empire. Trajan, Hadrian were emperors over Egypt and over our country. Well, what was then Romania. Ottomans the same.
Hadrian was a great interested person in the cult of Isis himself,
yes.
And he visited Egypt, and of course he has a lot of stories and myths surrounding him, but definitely we have a common background.
Yes, it's interesting to know that now maybe we perceive each other as two different countries relatively far, although it's not so far in fact. But we were part of the same cultural, civilizational world, of the same, and we had the same ruler. We had to obey, in a way, for the same ruler, sometimes in Rome, very, very long time ago, and then in Istanbul or Constantinople for a very long time. But I'd say it has been like in many other cases, our geography was both a blessing and a curse. And we tried our best as a relatively small country, or a middle power, as we call them now, to make the best out of it and to provide the best for the Romanians. And what defines us is that we are Central Eastern European country, which means also culturally something, and a Black Sea country. So you would find this strong Black Sea strategic accent in our foreign policy because we are a Black Sea country.
So, as you have said, you were just three principalities and that were falling under the domain of different empires according to the period that these empires were thriving, whether this during the Roman Empire or during the Ottoman Empire. And lately, even, let's talk about the 19th century, because in the 19th century, in spite of this being a century full of wars, especially the Napoleonic Wars in the beginning, and even what happened between France and Germany in 1870, then we can talk that the modern Romanian state was formed in 1859 through a personal union of the Danubian principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia. The new state officially was named Romania since 1866, and it gained independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1877. If we look at these particular years, I mean, 1877 is what happened after the invasion of the Prussians to Paris. And so how was that possible among all these turmoils that a country does not fall under the spice of empires but was able to get an independence? I think this is makes it very special.
Well, the 19th century was a very special century,
yes.
both for your country
yes.
and also for my country. So as I said, I think this is a common thread through all our conversation this afternoon, that there are many more things in common in terms of how we developed, evolved as a nation between Romania and Egypt. So 19th century, this was our founding as a state, which only included initially the 19th century two of the three principalities, because we will maybe touch on the third one, where I come from, Transylvania. So just two, Moldova and the southern Romania. From the south, we call it the Romanian country, or Wallachia, if you want, was not allowed by the Ottomans. Of course, the Ottomans would have rather have fragmented three or two principalities, because the others would be the Austrians. So two principalities that are weak then have a stronger one. They also didn't like the idea that Romanians for a century now, in the 19th century, would perceive themselves as one nation. Mm-hmm. They just thought if we live in two different countries, then they should perceive themselves as very different. But in the 19th century, with Romanticism as an ideology and also as a philosophical and cultural trend, the Romanians in all three became to think of themselves as one nation, which was something new. We all spoke the same language for centuries, but we didn't perceive up until late 18th, early 19th century as one nation. Mm-hmm. But that starts, and it will be fully crowned or achieved in the 20th century. We start thinking of all of us in three different principalities as one country, and there is a whole ideology, and the elite which was much formed in Germany and France. So for the first time in 19th century, Romania does not look to Istanbul and to the East in a way for culture models and for going to school, but our elite starts going to France and Germany a lot, and that will influence, and Austria, Vienna. That would even our elite from the two principalities, so not from Transylvania. That will influence a lot our politics over the last century. So this elite starts perceiving itself as a Romanian unified one. They have culture movements in that sense, and they start building a national identity. And they want to get these two principalities both under Ottoman influence and with some regulations under Ottoman, a bit like your Khedive, let's say, to simplify. Want to unify them, and of course the Ottoman Empire doesn't like that. Some of the other countries doesn't like that. So what do they find as a very interesting and very shrewd historical solution, I would say? On the same day, they organize elections in the two capitals, in Iași and in Bucharest, and they elect the same person. So initially, which I don't know if there are other cases in history, there was not a union of country. The same ruler was elected as a ruler of the two countries in two capitals. That was a de facto union, but de jure it was in two countries. And then our diplomacy of the time, this sort of incipient diplomacy, went to Paris, went to Constantinople, went to all the capitals around the world, with a lot of work and a lot of intelligence and lobby to make this recognized. And that was initially a personal union with a very, very visionary ruler, which was Alexandru Ioan Cuza in 1859. And gradually he made the great powers of Europe and also Istanbul accept this in a year or two. And I wanted to mention his name, Alexandru Ioan Cuza, because from him we have some of the first official correspondence between our rulers and Egypt rulers. So Alexandru Ioan Cuza, in I think around 62, writes to your Khedive, first to the Khedive mother, which he met, I think, in Constantinople, and through our common representatives in the Ottoman court, writes to congratulate the Khedive on the Suez Canal, on the building of the Suez Canal. And from there we know that huge amount of Romanian wood from the Romanian forest was exported to Egypt to build the Suez Canal. And I found this, I will maybe write an article at some point, I found this one of the most interesting links between our history, that in something that's so important, it's crucial for Egypt's development, there is something Romanian, that we exported a lot of wood to consolidate the sort of the walls, the sides of the canal, the slopes. And he writes to the Khedive and appreciates this fantastic project, and really his words are about utmost appreciation.
1862, this means it was Said, because Ismail went to the throne as a Khedive in 1863 after the death of Said.
And
so this is
I think it was Ismail, yes.
Said and then Ismail.
Said, and so because then after in 64 he's overruled, and I'll tell you later how. But this is really our contribution, and how he found out about this. Of course, there was some press at that point, but not circulating so fast from Cairo, let's say, to Romania of the time. The head of cabinet of Alexandru Ioan Cuza, of this personal unification leader, was a friend of the French, I think, engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps.
Ferdinand de Lesseps, yes.
Yes, who was the builder of the canal. So they kept in a personal correspondence also the two friends, French friends, to also see the role of France in your history and our history. And that's how he found out, and he really decided to export and help this marvelous project.
Well, this is very interesting, because we come to another interesting point of the history of Romania, which is World War I. Because in World War I, after declaring its neutrality in 1914, Romania fought together with the Allied powers from 1916. And was the involvement in the war inevitable? And what did the end of the war bring to modern Romania? Because this is very critical. I mean, Romania was forced to go to this war, or what?
Yes, critical question for our history, just like you meet or you get in time over centuries in some moments that in retrospect, in hindsight, historians can say that was crucial for the country. But before I'll come to this First World War, because it's very important where Romania stood before and after. But just between Alexandru Ioan Cuza and the First World War, you were also asking about the 1877 victory. So when Cuza was overruled for all kinds of internal plots, the Romanian aristocracy was wise in a certain sense. The Romanian aristocracy from the two principalities, because it was still a distinctive aristocracy, not one community. They decided that rather than quarreling all the time which aristocratic family gets the crown, so to say the principality of Romania, gets to lead the unified country, to avoid this, because this is very weak for the country and fragmentates the power, we should import a foreign king. Wow. Which is quite innovative in a way. They said we need someone, we need a family that's over the local families, the aristocrat families, to help us not quarrel among themselves and be more unified and reconciled, which, internal reconciliation is key in many, if you look at conflicts around and so on, I will not comment. But they realized we need something stronger, so we stopped fighting for power between some of them. Of course, not all wanted, but the decisive elites thought we need to import, so to say, to bring a foreign king which would be above all our clout and all our quarrels and would rule impartially. And they looked for a couple of years, of course, to the royal families in Europe. And finally, in 1866, they had the agreement of Charles I of Hohenzollern family, so a German royal family. He was a young prince. He didn't have a royal perspective in the family in Germany, in Prussia at the time. So he accepted to come and rule Romania. Imagine going, thousands of kilometers away, discovering a new country, no language knowledge, but he wanted that.
It happened in Sweden, right?
Yeah, and he proved to be a providential leader for the country. He was probably one of the best historical choices we made in modern history. And in 1877, he took the opportunity as head of the army, but also with our elite and our decision makers, to join Russia to find the Ottomans. So systemically, we took the opportunity, just like you did, I think, in Egypt, a bit later, a couple of years later, to try and shake us a bit from the Ottoman rule by joining Russia in its anti-Ottoman war. And there was very heavy loss on the front, and many Romanian lives lost on the front, just like Bulgarians, I think, and Greeks. But finally, with the victory in the Berlin Congress, the peace treaty, we got to be recognized. That was the final recognition of the 1815 Union. Mm-hmm. So in 1877, in war, on the front, and then in Berlin, we became the first Romanian state to recognize the euro. Meanwhile, it was a bit gray. So Carol is this German-inspired or German family king with whom Romania is ruled, or by whom Romania is ruled when the First War starts. And you can imagine Romania was quite a developed country. We were all inspired by Western moderns. France was very influential in Romania, Napoleon III and after. French was the best language spoken by the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. And there we go, and this moment in which the war starts, and we have a historical August, I think we have two calendars at that point. In August Crown Council, it's called 1914, there King Charles, a German family king, is surrounded by key ministers, prime minister, and some of the Romanian key political figures. Some of them split between staying with Germany and some of them wanting to go with the Entente, so with UK and France. Why go in UK and France? Because we had first signs from Russia, UK, so Great Britain at the time, and France, that they will give us Transylvania, the third lasting, the remaining principality, in case we win. So in case we make the war effort with them, they will give us Transylvania, take it from Austria, who would be a defeated power. So not side with Austria and Germany, Habsburg or Austro-Hungary, but side with them, we will get Transylvania. And imagine the difficulty. So we have entire lessons and history books written about the difficulty of that Crown Council. And they were very responsible politicians. And it was really at a crossroad, meaning life or death, even for the country. Would we get our third principality in case of victory? In case of defeat, maybe you are wiped out of the map, in a way. Charles would have liked to go with Austria and with Austro-Habsburg Empire and with Germany, but most of the other elite present, the ministers, say no, we should go with the others or stay neutral. So finally, the art of compromise, although he was so inclined, the king, and he had the powers, he would have the prerogative, he listens to the council and to the advisory board, and they decide to stay neutral. And then he dies in about a month. And what comes after is his nephew, because he didn't have, like an uncle, he didn't have his own children. His nephew of the same German family married to Queen Mary, what has become Queen Mary. Queen Mary, the granddaughter of Victoria of England. Queen Mary, granddaughter of Victoria of England and of Alexander I in Russia. And she was one of our key political figures, a bit of the Cleopatra of the 20th century. She was very politically engaged and involved, very wise. And she lobbies tremendously the king and the Romanian aristocracy that we should stop being neutral and go with France, Great Britain, Russia, Imperial Russia, to gain Transylvania. And she's really convincing, together with other influential people. And we have the successor. So in 1916, we have another crown council. These are key moments in Romanian history in which Ferdinand, the new king, asked the same question: do we stay neutral? Do we enter the war? And they decide we enter the war, but not with the king's family, so to say, originating family, but with the others, with the Entente. And then starts the whole war effort. What the neutrality in 1914 gave us 2 years to prepare. So we had 2 years. We said we are neutral in 1914, but in fact the elite and the government, they were thinking and they tried to prepare the army at its best to enter the war. So we entered 1916, and because of all the turbulences of the war, imagine that in 1917 we are close to extinction, meaning the king and the queen withdraw to a very tiny piece up north in Moldova. Germans conquer all the south. We lose several battles, and all Romania is shrinking to around like Cairo, let's say, or even less. And it seems that defeat is there. So they bet on a certain alliance. They decided a certain alliance, but they don't get enough help from Western Europe. It seems we are going to be defeated, and our soldiers finally managed to resist and to push back, to stop the Germans. So we resist in a fraction of the Romanian territory. Only for 1 year later for Queen Mary and King Ferdinand to come back to Bucharest in triumph, because they finally managed to rebuild or revitalize the army, make a last war effort. And they are held by, of course, the victory powers, France and Great Britain over Germany. And in 1918, 1 year after being almost extinct, the king and the queen come back to Bucharest as triumphant sort of leaders. And then in 1st of December 1918, which is key for us, Transylvania has a popular assembly, the last remaining principality outside Romania. And they decide they join Romania. And that's the date of the birth certificate of current-day Romania. 1st December 1918, we celebrated 100 years of existence as a modern state a couple of years ago. When after World War I, with a lot of risk and very hard decision, we managed to get the third territory. All this being in majority lived by Romanians. So it was a unification of people who felt they are the same nation for more than 2 centuries. Very risky. Sometimes I wonder, as a diplomat, of course, you work with political leaders and with ministers. Imagine being in those crown councils in 14 and 16. Do you take the right decision? Do you win, or do you just lose the whole country? Tremendous responsibility.
And it's a great risk. And actually what happened in the end of the World War I, there was not a single victorious country or a state or an army. The defeat was forced on the Germans, saying, well, you are defeated and that's it. Well, actually, they were not that defeated. They were still having their power, and they were still having a lot of, more than millions of soldiers under arms. And yet they accepted that they were defeated, and this was the start of a cascade that brought in World War II. So now you have Transylvania, and you have apparently a prosperous future. But in the period of in between 2 wars, where the Versailles Treaty has shaped the world for worse, not for better. After what happened in Versailles Treaty, and people were starting to get prepared for another war. What happened in between the 2 wars?
That's a very favorable question for Romania. So it must be said that while Versailles Treaty was a difficult treaty to arrive at, and lost many powers, unsatisfied to say the very least, in Europe, for Romania it was a very favorable treaty, because it gave Transylvania for the first time to the Romanian state. And of course there were unhappy powers who lost Transylvania, but it was a majority-lived Romanian, and it was the culmination of our national dream, so to say. In between the wars, we have first the victorious king and the queen ruling Romania. for a while. We look nowadays at the interwar period like our golden age, maybe except for the last decade, and we'll touch on that. The interwar period was one of our peaks, both in terms of politics, economics, cultural life. Bucharest as a capital would thrive, would become a very beautiful city with a lot of modern French architects coming, a lot of French being spoken all around. And they used to call Bucharest the Little Paris in the interwar period. Our most famous musicians, philosophers, painters, poets, novelists, you name it, were all born and were active in that period. So it's really the golden, the thriving period of Romania. Romania is at the biggest sort of surface in its history. All the Romanians, the majority lives in one state. And there is this economic boom after the war with agricultural reforms and democratic reforms. So after the First World War, we gave universal vote, which was quite revolutionary. It's the thriving time. So I think up until we entered the European Union and joined NATO recently, relatively 20 years ago, let's say, interwar period was the age in which we look with much nostalgia and regrets, and the pictures of everything that was around, reading the philosophers, the writers, listen to the music. Then it was a golden moment for Romania. But it's true that at the same time you had this Belle Epoque feeling around in Romania, but the political class knew that there were turbulent forces and there were things not set after the First War, which will mean the end of peace.
So from 1919 till 1939, there was no problem. But come the year 1940, the World War started 1 year earlier, and in November, that is after the surrender and the great defeat of France, in November 1940, Romania signed the Tripartite Pact, and consequently in June 1941, entered World War II on the Axis side, fighting against the Soviet Union until August 1944, and then it joined the Allies. This seems like a very complicated chain of decisions. What was behind it? Could it have been better other ways? I mean, this is really, Sophie's choice, if we use the expression. This is very complicated choices. I mean, you didn't do the mistake in World War I, and you have gambled on the right side of history. And in 1941, you have chosen to join the Axis, and you were considered part of the southern group of the German forces advancing to Russia, and Romania was a very important trophy for some of the wells of petroleum that were present, and the amount of source that Hitler was looking forward to have and acquire. So what happened? What really happened? I mean, was the king going to his German ancestors, or he was? I know he went into exile, and he didn't follow. He didn't want to continue with the Axis. I mean, this looks very complicated. Like the people write on their Facebook, it's complicated, right?
And you are so right, Doctor. You are so right, Dr. Mabrouk.
It is complicated.
History. It's maybe it's a bit less complicated when you really take the time to read and think about it. And I remember I was a passionate of history, so if I go on and on, I try to resume a lot for your listeners, but it's a lot. I remember these lessons about how we entered World War II, how we managed World War II, were one of the most complicated for our history teachers in school to explain the logic behind it in a way. And of course, sometimes you can see it even nowadays. The leaders, the governors, the ministers, the president take the best decision they think at that moment is the best, and history will prove it, will validate it or invalidate it. But it's easy to say when you look hindsight. Hindsight, maybe you should do that or that. But at this point, you must sometimes understand the context and the factors, also sometimes the personal factors. Just like I said, for example, with the Queen Mary, who was instrumental. She was not the only factor, but she was instrumental. Now, this story, indeed, one of the most complex and complicated time, because towards the end of the interwar period, it must be acknowledged that extreme right ideology started to prevail in some of the Romanian political class as well. So one of the factors, although not maybe the decisive, was that some of the elite felt sympathetic. We didn't know about the extremism of the Holocaust and so on, but in some of these far right statements or values, some of our politicians believed. So there was a sort of an ideological, limited, but sort of an ideological familiarity or closeness with Germany.
The National Socialist was a fancy.
Yes, it was a fancy choice.
And a lot of people were fond of it.
For some influential people, not for everyone, but for some people who were ministers or were close to the circle of powers.
But the king was not with this side.
No, the king was not with this side, but the king, we have our own Edward VI, so to say, the second story. The king was involved in a private affair and in a personal moment in his life in which his duties as a king came a bit secondary to... So when he abdicated, he also abdicated that his choice, he had someone else beside the queen herself, and he wanted to follow some of that private life.
That's like Edward VIII, right?
Yes, the 8th, yes. So it's a bit of that story, although he didn't marry that lady, but his private life was a factor into him not playing a clear role and abdicating.
So abdicating for who?
For his son. So he abdicated in favor of his son, Michael I, and it must be really understood. Charles II, this was the king who abdicated. It's just a coincidence. His German background was already quite weak because he would be already the third king that Romania had. So it had been 60 years since.
We have to put in consideration that the German royalties have been already omitted since 1918, late 1918, early 1919, and the emperor himself the Kaiser himself was sent to exile, in self-exile. I think it was in Holland or something like that. I think yes, in Holland.
Where he went, I didn't know. But it's true, they were also they were not acting rulers.
They were not acting rulers.
And already when we became the Great Romania, as we call it, in 1st of December 1918, not the very same day, but years after, our royal family, just to make it, to prove to the people and to the entire world that they are the royal family of Romania, dropped also because they went against Germany in the First World War. The family said you can't use Hohenzollern, but also anymore.
So
they became of Romania. So ever since First World War, they became Mary of Romania, Ferdinand of Romania, Michael of Romania. So that was our last king.
Second of Romania. And then
Michael. Romania. So Michael, I can't remember, maybe 20. He was very, very early 20 when we switched arms. I think at the beginning of war, he was even younger. So here you have a very, very young king, Mihai I of Romania, and the country when the king abdicates and we have all these decisions to make whether we stay with whom and so on. And we have a very strong field marshal, Marshal Antonescu, who is in fact the de facto leader of the country. And he was the decisive person to weigh in. So we stay with Germany and with the Axis. Why? Because in the Russian-German pact, Ribbentrop-Molotov pact in 1399, they took Transylvania, most of Transylvania from Romania, right? They gave it back to Hungary. And Marshal Antonescu was hoping and betting, so trying to help Germany, so they will convince them during the war. Probably he also believed in German victory, it must be said. This was the 41. To support Germany in order to regain Transylvania, because we lost it. We call it the Diktat of Vienna. We lost, and it was a very, it made Romanians suffer. It was a painful loss, really. Like you would lose part of Egypt now. So we lost part of it. So he thought, although it was forced by Germany on us and Russia, but still he thought if we support Germany, then maybe we get, at the end of war, when Germany, he thought so, will be victorious, we get Transylvania back. That was the number one factor. And the number two, and also maybe some affinity with Germany, he was an army marshal and so on. Then the second factor was that we were very much afraid of Russian communism. it must be said. That entire political class, with some minor exception, was fearful that if we ally with Russia, Russia will come conquer us again, just like 100 and 200 years ago and so on, and will impose communism on us, which eventually happened, unfortunately.
Yes.
So one of the other strong reason was that we wanted to make sure that we stay our course, that we are, what I don't know how you would call it, market economy. That was not the term at that point. But we stayed the course of being a monarchy with democratic institutions, with the private property and all of that. He was a very, very hard believer of anti-communism beliefs.
So what did King Michael do? He went to self-exile or what?
So King Michael, he was this ruler, very young, very unexperienced, with a strong marshal leading the country, who decided we go this way. And meanwhile, some of our diplomacy, because in all these moments, 1877, 1940, 1916, 1918, diplomacy was key. I don't want to make a sort of a plea for my profession, but without the diplomats we had and the politicians, wise foreign diplomats in a way, probably the country would not be in this shape. So the diplomats and some of the voices in the Romanian political class, influential voices, started thinking maybe it's not the best. And they were not to forget that we continue to be very Francophone. So we were lovers, supporters, big friends of France. We still are a big Francophone country. And of England. So that seemed very unnatural for many in Romania, that we would stay with the Axis. And then we lost Transylvania. And then the Germans took all the wheat and the oil and exploited heavily Romania in times of war. So there were voices trying to, reaching also out to King Michael in his very early 20s. Let's try and switch camps. That's true. Let's try, very secret, very confidential. Let's try and switch camps and go with the Allies. And the Allies will help us, France, US, when they entered Great Britain, will help us get Transylvania back and stay secure and safe. They will protect us. They will be our allies. And we go with this. But of course, this would the Marshal would not want to hear. So they had to have secretive workings and talks against the ruling, sort of say, power or decision maker. Why I'm mentioning this? Because now by heart, I can't remember exactly the years, but I think 42, 43, there were diplomatic contacts in Cairo of Romanian diplomatic representatives with allied diplomatic representatives, British and French, negotiating to switch camps.
Yes.
And there were many attempts, but the factor was, how do you overrule the marshal who just leads the whole Romania? The king was more of a formal sort of figure. And then finally, with all this plot trying to be developed and matured enough, the king takes this decision, very brave decision. 23rd of August, 1944, relatively late in war, clear that Germany is on a downward slope, to confront the marshal and to make the army arrest the marshal. You can fully imagine being also having a tradition in your army, and you know what discipline and hierarchy means. And he manages with some of the big politicians, and he manages to convince some of the security military forces to arrest the marshal. And then he takes actually the power that day, the 23rd of August, go on public radio for the first time and announces that Romania will switch camps and will go against Germany. He puts, of course, the army on alert, that we start pushing by fighting with the Germans in Bucharest and all across Romania. They were occupying power, but in a relatively surviving way. It was not an active conflict. And he tries this very brave gesture. He manages, the army listens, the marshal is put in prison, and he decides to switch camps. And then we negotiate, and we try to get Transylvania back, and we try to convince the Allied powers that we helped the war. And there are some British history books that say with how many 100,000 people, lives, Romania's changing of camps helped the war be shortened. But the sad story about this part of history is that Russia never wanted, this was already the Soviet Russia and the dictatorship Russia, Stalin never wanted to consider that we changed camps. They came in the country, they behaved like an occupying power, and they said no, this was not an act of really very important, and they diminished, and they tried even in history books to diminish that gesture and then to behave like an occupying power, unfortunately. And that's about the end of our interwar golden age, because in 1947, if I'm not mistaken, the Soviets already ruling Romania de facto, make the king abdicate. And they threatened to make him King Michael in order to convince him to abdicate, because he was very loyal and very devoted to his responsibility. There are archives saying that the Russian forces being present threatened him that they would shoot in the public square 1,000 students. They will shoot them in front of the royal palace if he doesn't abdicate, because they were pressuring him for 2 years to abdicate, and he didn't. He went in Great Britain, married the princess Anne de Bourbon, and the Soviets in Romania thought he'll stay there because he knows his own safety. He's married in UK, he stays there. No, he came back with his new wife to Romania. So the Soviets and the Romanians supporting the Soviets, some of them were very disappointed. So finally he abdicates on 30th of December, and then the communist history of Romania starts. But it is important to say that we never won. It was never popular, and it was a political choice imposed on us. And in a way, there is this feeling, I have to say, in Romania, it has been there for decades, that France and Great Britain, I must say that, although they are now our strategic partners, and US let us down, yes. Which is the same in Hungary, the same in Poland.
The only country that they stood by their side was, from which the Russians have withdrawn, was Austria.
Yes.
Other countries were even left
to their own
fate. Yes.
To their own fate, yes. And to fight an occupation. And
so the king left in exile?
In exile. He lived in Switzerland for his entire life. He died a couple of years ago. I met his family. I know the custodianship of the crown, the way we call his eldest daughter. He lived in Switzerland, and after the 1989 revolution, the communist revolution, he made several attempts to come. Some of them, we were a country in turmoil. We were trying to define who we are after 50 years of communism, and having lost our interwar sort of tradition, having lost our elites in prison. They all died. Thousands of business people, bankers, lawyers, everything that was an interwar elite died in prison. Then he tried. It was very, very complicated for Romania to accept who is this person and so on. We would only listen to him on Radio Free Europe. But I'm very proud of our government and leaders that in time they realized that we mind our own track after the revolution. We build a democratic Romania, private economy Romania. We are a republic. We have elections. But the king has his own merit. He was very admired historically by many people who knew the history of Second World War. So finally he was granted an official status in Romania. And he spent his last years, he was very, I think he died 90, so he had quite a long life. He stayed about a decade, his last decade in Romania. He went to Switzerland but came back. The Romanian state gave him back some of the palaces, a budget, all the protocol. So he had a semi-official status and was treated with utmost respect and appreciation, and was a voice that we all listened to. In some moments, with a historical wisdom. And that meant that our country is mature enough to not fear sort of the shadows of the history, and to treat him normally, decently, give him the respect that you give to any royal, but in a way that doesn't mean you contest, because Romania now is a different Romania. The royalists are maybe even less than 1%. But you do take this wisdom and your historical heritage and you assume it. You take responsibility for what we've been, ups and downs, good decisions, bad decisions. So I think it was a very wise choice, and he fully appreciated it. So towards the end of his life, he spoke Romanian all these decades, so he kept his Romanian very much alive. And he would be a public figure in Romania, but very discreet, so only intervening in key moments.
Mm-hmm. So this makes it very special, because in 1947, there was a character that started to appear that has left a great effect on Romania and Romanian history. And by that I mean Nicolae Ceausescu.
Yes.
So he was an avid communist during the war? Or how did he rise from
yes.
incognito to
absolutely incognito? And this is it's such a close, still, at the historical scale, the Ceausescu heritage is still a very recent heritage, 1989, so I've been living in communist times, and I'm a person that has been traumatized, like many other Romanians, by the dictatorship
of the last years.
But you were
very young then. So.
Yes, of course. Well, despite the appearances. Age is highly classified information, as we say in diplomacy. Apparently, so he was not a communist. First, and it must be said, try to be right for the historical and scientific reasons, he was not a very educated person. He had very few classes, I can't remember if 4 or 6, but he was not a highly educated person. He raised by his own forces from a very poor family in rural Romania. And it seems also that his marriage, you see the role of women sometimes in history, but you know it too well in Egypt, including in pharaonic times. He met this lady and married this lady, his future and lifetime wife, who had some links with communists. So the one in the family who apparently had some links with communist movement in Romania when it was still illegal, it was illegal during the Second World War because the Marshal was so set against the leftist ideology, was his wife. And he was an obscure party member up until the late 60s or in the 60s he climbed up gradually all the stairs of being an activist until he took the leadership of the party. But now, because I said we want to be scientific and objective, it must be said as a diplomat or admitted as a diplomat that although in the country the heritage left was very difficult. So he left many traumas, many people suffering. There were many lives lost because of his decision. Also we've discussed before, the influence of his wife, but also the influence of his entourage in foreign policy terms.
Elena Ceausescu, right?
Yes, Elena. In foreign policy terms, some of the things he did were not bad or not stupid at all, so to say. So we do take, as diplomats, now we come to acknowledge that in foreign policy terms, in terms of international reputation of Romania, some of the things he did, but of course with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with an entire structure and institution, were good things. And it took us some decades to be able to say this was bad, this was good, because the trauma after the revolution was so big that we would say everything was bad and you would just ban everything. So he raised to power being very shrewd. I think he had an instinctive sense of politics and political dynamics, and he raised to power in the late 60s. And became very popular because he was one of the first who spoke up against the Soviets. And he was a good friend of Egypt because he, in foreign policy, he had his talents. And we had a very professional, just like you have it here, a very professional diplomacy, very professional people, a strong institution with a strong tradition. So in foreign policy terms, he made himself very loved and very popular, which was the opposite of what he was in the country.
In the country, he has done great scandals, especially in the point of orphans, and how he has kept thousands of these orphans or neglected children in orphanages which were not properly kept. And this gives us a sign that Romanians who have never done that vigorous response did it with great revenge. And the whole world has seen Ceausescu and his wife shot to death on the walls of the presidential palace, the area that he himself has completely changed into a lot of concrete buildings and magnificent structures. And to the one of these walls, in a sort of very dramatic appearance,
very atypical for us.
Very atypical, yes. The president and his wife were shot. And I remember seeing the footage of the wife shouting back till the last moment. She was very aggressive and very outspoken, and she was very aggressive until she was silenced by these machine guns. So all the people at that period will skip this dark period, thought that Romania is not going to pick up. And people thought that it will fall into maybe under the authority of some group of rulers, or it will pass like in a route of a third world country. And suddenly the world saw Romania rising like a phoenix. Do you attribute this rise? Because we can see now that it has it's now become a high-income country with a very high human development index and a highly complex economy that is emerging to be a middle power in the international affairs. Romania is ranked as 47th in the Global Innovation Index in 2023. Its economy ranks among the fastest growing in European Union. And when we look at that, And people think that Romania is having a ruling of semi-presidential. We have a president and a prime minister who is responsible in front of the president for the government. It's more or less like the type that people you're interested in, which is France. France has the same system, which was the Fifth Republic by de Gaulle, and it's a very functioning system. And I think you were right in choosing it. So. And Romania is having, beside that, it's one of the best places to live in Europe, and economically wise, you are not forced to. The prices are not that expensive. So there was a lot of things to make this recipe. How was it possible? And I believe that the golden period that you have talked about, which is from 1919 till 1939, has really made the difference. What do you think of that?
You are right. You're so right. One can see, Doctor, that you read a lot of history and see patterns where maybe some others don't see just scattered events. So first, just to finish on Ceausescu, because every time we touch, any Romanian touches on the subject, it still makes us think. We are not very proud of that violent act. But it's atypical. We are not a very violent nation. Our political life has always been quite settled. But the hate was so deep. So deep, because there were so many people dying in dictatorship over the decades, and the orphanage is one of the scandals. But also consider, and I've been through that, I will admit it, confess it openly, we had food shortages, we had power shortages for like 8-10 hours. He wanted to be autonomous, so he wanted Romania to pay all his foreign debt. Imagine, zero debt. And when the revolution came, we were in zero debt. We had 2 billion in the treasury. But to pay the debt, so he didn't want to depend on anyone else. He would starve the Romanians in order to export butter, wheat, bread, whatever we didn't have. So I was raised up in a family who struggled. I have a sister, we were 6 persons with the grandparents. We struggled for food, which is something, if you go to Europe, to Western Europe, they haven't witnessed it for 70 decades, yes. So from that sense of view, from daily life to all other horrors and people being in prison and dying, and he was really much hated. And he tried to push Romania towards a way in which we didn't want to go. And that Western, French, English cultural heritage that was there in the interwar was still with Romania. So from that point of view, after the revolution, when the revolution came, we just opened up all this sort of hate and let it rule, as it happens sometimes in revolution, very violent and turbulent. But then when reason sort of came back, we knew what we wanted. We wanted to become like our European models. We really still believed, even after 5 decades of communism, that we want to be like Germany and France, and we want that life. And also that we want to go back to belong to the European community. So that was very much built in our choice. And then we started from the 90s on trying to become NATO members, European Union members, and that was a struggle of 20 years. It's not NATO who wanted Romania to come in. We tried for 15 years to convince NATO members and the NATO decision makers that we are worth it and we can provide for security. So the way was, the whole political class was agreed, and that was our luck, or again their wisdom. In tough times they were wise and they didn't look to only their immediate interest. They decided that the most popular thing, or the only thing that Romanians want, is to go west, to become, let's say, Germany. We used to say we want a country like outside. We want a country like, and we took that path. Very difficult. We have had our negotiations with IMF. I did my PhD on that. Tough. They asked us to do very difficult measures, and they felt tough. And there were years in which we felt we are lost. Maybe we are never going to get in the EU, but we pay this price because we want to transform deeply something that became, after the revolution, a mix of the former interwar Romania and a lot of communist inertia, which was unavoidable. We didn't know private property, entrepreneurship, nothing of that has been seen for 5 decades. So how do you become an entrepreneur? Being a lifetime employee of the state, it's a huge... So there were 20 very difficult years with ups and downs. And I know I can feel when hear people talk of shortages or maybe transformations that are painful, it's worth taking them. Sometimes it's like in life, every nation has its ups and its downs. But finally, it's true, it was worth it. And our EU membership and NATO accession just gave us probably the best, our president says, and we all agree with this, the best period in our time. So this is the richest, most dynamic and safest Romania that we have seen reading our own history.
Definitely, this is an experience to be admired. But since you are now the ambassador of Romania to Egypt, I think you have... we have a very unique relation between Egypt and Romania. During Sadat's time, of course, we know that, but definitely we'll talk about the Egyptian-Romanian relation and how are you going to improve that and get it even more into a more better place in economic and political cooperation.
That's I'll start to really make it easy because it's more simple than all the history we have discussed. My mandate is in a way very clear. Politically, we have excellent relations, and that's also helped to, for example, Ceausescu-Sadat friendship, which was a true friendship and a functional one. We were instrumental in your peace treaty with one of the important neighbors. So they did have a correspondence and were friends and advised each other. So politically, we have no special irritants. No, the political dialogue is excellent. The presidents have met in Bucharest, in Cairo. Politically, I say I just have to caretake, so to have a good care of the relationship. My priorities are economic and cultural, really. Economic, to have more investment from Romania here and more trade. It's one of the best trades we have in the whole Middle East and in whole Africa, Romania, Egypt. And also culturally, I want to just pass the cultural relations that we have at the older generations level to the newest generation, because young Egyptians and young Romanians don't know each other so much. And I'd like them to have this friendship carried on for the next generations.
Well, I think this is very kind of you. And this has been a very fruitful discussion. And I would like very much to thank you. And I'd like you to promise us to come back again, because we had today a very distinguished diplomat, Her Excellency Ambassador Olivia Toderean, Ambassador of Romania to Cairo. Thank you very much for the food for thought and for the talk from the heart about Romania, the history of Romania and Egyptian-Romanian relations. And with this, we come to the end of our program. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was at the control, and we'll see you the same time, same station next week.
Thank you. Shukran.